thanks, Mark, for sitting down with me. One of the things as a manager and as an experienced manager yourself, curious to get your take on is boards that just can't make a decision. I like to call it decision-making paralysis.
Yeah, it's
kind
a
of
good
what I
word
like to
for
refer
it.
to.
Yep.
So I figured you probably had some stories, maybe some ways around that, ways to motivate boards, get them to move towards some sort of action on whatever the item might be.
I mean, you're always going to have a board that has, an odd number of people, and that's for a reason, right? So that there's a deciding vote. And it's definitely a thing where, a board can be facing a decision, whether it be large or small, or a rule revision, or, what have you. It's easy to, overthink it and go past the facts and start thinking about how it's going to affect everyone. You do want to, take into consideration, your full association. You're not just making a decision for yourself or for the board. You're making a decision for the entire association. So it's important to weigh all the, the pros and cons. But at the same time, you don't want to get too in your head with it.
Yeah.
Right? If it's at the point where you're discussing it during a board meeting, you're already going to have the information you need to know to make that decision. Your manager is going to be, they're a professional in this area. They're going to be able to make a recommendation based on their experience. In similar scenarios, there's, no matter how unique a scenario seems and a decision seems, I guarantee you your manager has seen it at least once.
Sure.
And has seen the aftermath of how their decision plays.
Well, you bring up a good point that I always like to think about is when you talk about homeowner involvement and how that influences a board. And I think that's one of the biggest areas I see where some boards really do get hung up and they can't make a decision because they think that they can make everybody happy. And we all know that saying, you can't make everybody happy.
Yep.
So I've always said one of the first things to overcome as a board is just accept the fact that you're not going to make everybody happy.
Yeah, it's a big one. You're never going to have 100% buy-in on anything. But that's okay. And that's why there's a board of directors, right? If everyone was in agreement 100% of the time, you wouldn't need to be on board.
I always like to remind people an association is just like the United States of America. It's not a democracy. It's a republic, right? You are elected to make decisions on behalf of the homeowners, and whatever that decision is, everyone is not always going to be happy every time.
Yep.
The other thing I think homeowners can get or boards can get hung up on is that same issue, but interior to the board, like just the board being in agreement on something. A lot of times you're going to have split opinions amongst the board. Maybe it's the budget, right? Maybe Joe and Bill think that we can't do a dues increase, and the other three say no, we need it. And then you proceed to have a 3-hour board meeting that at the end of it, the three that thought we needed it win anyway, but Bill and Joe, their mind wasn't changed.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, so there's a couple things there, and I'll use your budget example. So with a budget, I mean, that's an excellent opportunity to really lean into your manager. I say that as a manager.
Yeah, right. A little biased.
Yeah, a little biased, but I mean, part of what we do is we stare at the financials. We plan out the next multiple years at your association. We're always, deep diving into your financials. So if anyone's going to know, what you're anticipated to spend in the next year, it's more than likely going to be your manager.
Sure.
So that's an excellent opportunity to utilize and leverage your manager.
Yeah.
And I mean, that certainly can help when you're making those decisions. Another point with, going back to talking about it for 3 hours and ending up where you started
right.
is, you want to make sure that you don't get to the point where you're just talking in circles, right? I mean, it is a debate, but at the same time, there's no winner and loser in this discussion. It's really, you want to get to the point where you have all the facts laid out. You have enough information to make the vote, and then put it to a vote.
Sure.
I mean,
and getting to that final step, I think is what's key, and that's my second point about the board. So I think one of the biggest things about that is just know when the debate and when the discourse is done.
Right.
I mean, it needs to happen, and most likely, depending on the issue, of course, most likely minds aren't going to be changed, but you need to allow that information to flow But at some point, you just got to move forward.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep.
You just got to move forward. That's one of the things. I hate tabling items. I can't. I've always told a board, if you ever table something, I'm just going to consider whatever you're tabling to never get accomplished.
Yep. That's accurate. I mean, because what are you doing when you're tabling something?
You're not ready to move on it, and most likely you're never going to be ready until you get a couple new board members to swing the vote. Right? So yeah, I think that's the second point to overcoming the board paralysis or boards in action, is just recognize when a topic is not going to move forward and call it to a vote.
Yep.
Which is my third point.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
That is my third and final point to getting a board to move forward, is that someone needs to play that role of taskmaster. Someone needs to be the facilitator. Sometimes that's the manager. Every board's a little different, right? Sometimes the manager's there to take notes. Sometimes they run the whole meeting because the board doesn't care, and everywhere in between, right? But someone needs to play that role of realizing when a topic is dead and calling it to a vote. And hey, sorry, Sue, I know you're not going to like this. You expressed your opinion, but the other 4 board members are waiting on go. And call it to a vote. And how you do that diplomatically, obviously, is...
And again, that really depends on the board.
True. That is true.
Yeah, I mean, whether it be if I'm in a meeting and, we're at that point where, the conversation is kind of treading water and, it's clearly time to vote. If no one's taking that initiative, I may say, I feel like we're at a point where the board could vote.
Sure.
But I mean, from that point, it's basically, I back up and, let them make the motion. And so. Yeah,
I mean, there's nothing more frustrating to a manager, obviously we're biased to that, but also to the association, right? Than a board that just can't get out of their own way and move forward on something. So I think, there's 3 things we talked about today is just realize you can't have unanimous consent amongst your whole membership.
Yep.
Certainly realize that as a board, you might not always have a unanimous vote, and that's okay. That's okay. Let the discourse happen, but then move forward, and then you can move forward by having a strong facilitator.
Yeah, and I think part of that facilitator's role is to, steer the meeting and the discussion in a positive direction. I mean, ultimately, the decision you're making should be a positive one for the association, right? So, I think it's important for the manager to know their role, for the board to know their role, and then everyone can function in a.
We can all live happily ever after.
Exactly.
Right. Well, hopefully this will help some people just move forward with
I hope so. Yeah. It should.
It should.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'll continue pulling our hair out as managers.
Yeah, there we go.